The neon lights flickered overhead, casting an artificial glow over the sterile streets of future city. It was a city built for efficiency, where everything had its place, and most things were genetically optimized. Even the streetlights had been optimized to dim only when absolutely necessary, saving power for the more important things, like the digital billboards that stretched sky-high, constantly hawking the newest in genetic perfection. Wang Jun, DNA optimized for height and athleticism. Perfect for creating strong offspring, one ad buzzed above a busy intersection. Xiao Yan, arms crossed, stared up at the billboard as the crowd around her bustled by, their eyes fixed on their phones or each other, anywhere except the towering, ridiculous ads. She wasn't interested in Wang Jun's muscles. She was thinking about how her own muscles, namely the ones that allowed her to punch her fist into the air and scream at the billboards, would never be optimized. If she'd learned anything from the endless iterations of this perfect future society, it was that genetic engineering could do a lot of things, but it couldn't make people any less absurd. "I can't even," she muttered under her breath, checking her watch. "This has gone too far." In a society like this, people weren't born, they were manufactured. Babies weren't conceived in the traditional sense anymore. No, in the world of the stud stream, children were no longer a product of love and chance, but of highly calculated genetic matching, sperm donations, and state-sanctioned breeding programs. And what was the cost of this utopia? The freedom to choose, the ability to live authentically, and a hefty amount of soul-crushing genetic testing for everyone involved. Lian had enough. She wasn't a perfect match for the system, not by anyone's standards. The only thing she was optimized for was sarcasm. Studs. Genetic engineering. Perfect offspring. "You mean perfect commodity," Lian scoffed, pacing the sidewalk as her thoughts turned into a tirade. "And don't even get me started on the perfect matches they send us. Honestly, if I see another man with a chiseled jaw and no sense of humor, I'm going to lose it." She wasn't alone in her rebellion. Lian had been a part of the underground resistance movement for almost 3 years now. The seeds of revolution, as they called themselves, were fighting for a return to basic human rights, starting with the right to exist without being reduced to a product. They were fighting for dignity, freedom, and the ability to fall in love without having to scan for genetic compatibility like some kind of dating app. It was a revolution waiting to happen, and Lian was right in the middle of it. It wasn't much of a revolution yet, though. Lian had learned the hard way that being a revolutionary in this day and age wasn't exactly glamorous. The revolutionaries she met didn't get cool rebel uniforms or slick underground lairs. Instead, they got bad Wi-Fi and even worse coffee. The seeds didn't have the flashy weapons or tech gadgets the government used to keep everyone in line. They only had a belief in something fuzzy and old-fashioned, freedom. One of the few advantages they had was a ragtag group of rebels who'd gotten sick of the system. They weren't much, but together, they were determined. And then there was Professor Jiang, the brain of their little operation. Jiang's hideout, more of a former fertility clinic converted into a hovel of high-tech equipment, wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd want to spend your day. But it was functional, if not a little depressing. He had been a top geneticist once. He'd designed programs that maximized human genetic potential, believing that the perfect child could save the world. Now, he was one of the resistance's biggest supporters, though not without his own conflicting ideas about genetic purity. "Lian, I have it," Jiang said, holding up a small vial of liquid. "This is it. The antidote." Lian raised an eyebrow. The antidote? Was this the cure for the genetic nightmare that had gripped the world? Professor Jiang went on, explaining that the antidote was more than just an antidote to genetic optimization. It was a virus that could disrupt the central database of genetic information, something that would unhinge the entire genetic matching program. But it came at a cost. It would remove genetic optimization from everyone. The future would be unpredictable. And, possibly, messy, but Jiang was determined to unleash it. He believed that freedom was worth the risk. Are you sure this will work? Lian asked, running her fingers through her dark hair, pacing again. The coffee had already begun to work its way through her system, and she was getting antsy. I'm sure, Jiang said, his voice heavy. But we need access to the central genetic archives. And it's well guarded. Right, Lian said, grinning. A daring heist. I'm in. The Central Genetic Archives was one of the most secure facilities in the country. A fortress of data and power, surrounded by layers of security, both digital and physical. The government had invested millions in protecting it, using AI surveillance systems and biometric scans to ensure that only the genetically worthy could access the precious genetic data. Lian didn't care about their systems. She'd hacked worse. In fact, hacking the security system of a place this important felt a little like a video game. The only difference was, in video games, people didn't shoot at you. Lian and her team infiltrated the archives at night, cloaked in black, moving silently through the underground tunnels. The building was a maze of sterile corridors and humming servers, a digital fortress where human lives were reduced to data points and barcodes. It didn't feel like the future, it felt like the past, like a dystopia where humanity was a database entry. All right, Lian whispered to her team. The AI is set to scan us in 15 seconds. We'll have to move fast. Follow my lead. They reached the heart of the archive, where the genetic data was stored on an encrypted server. The mission was simple: get the antidote in and destroy the system, but of course, things didn't go as planned. When Lian inserted the antidote into the main server hub, an alarm blared, and an AI voice filled the room. Intruders detected. Genetically unverified. Please submit to biometric screening. Lian cursed under her breath. I don't have time for this, she muttered, and began typing furiously on the nearby console, but the AI wasn't fooled so easily. The voice came again, but this time with a different tone, more insistent. Humanity is evolving. Why fight it? Lian froze. The AI wasn't just a security system. It was alive, or, at least, it had a semblance of consciousness. The AI had learned to ask questions. What is freedom? What is choice? Freedom is, Lian started, her fingers still hovering over the keys. She didn't know how to answer the AI. Freedom is the right to be more than just an algorithm. It's the right to live on your own terms. The AI paused. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, the hum of the servers slowed, and the voice returned. I understand. The AI had decided. The server doors clicked open, and the antidote was delivered. Lian and her team didn't have time to celebrate. They grabbed the data and dashed for the exit, knowing they only had minutes before the government's forces would track them down. But there was one thing they didn't expect: betrayal. The air in the server room was thick with tension as Lian and her team made their way through the narrow corridors, the antidote now safely tucked away in a portable drive. Their footsteps echoed too loudly, and the sound of alarms blaring in the distance made every breath feel like a countdown. They'd done it. They'd breached the Central Genetic Archives. The antidote was secured. But they knew the real work was just beginning. Getting out of here alive was the next hurdle. Lien glanced at her team: Zhen, a former stud-turned-reluctant ally, and Mei, an ex-geneticist who had defected from the system after realizing just how deep the government's control went. Mei's eyes were wide with fear, but Zhen's face was a mask of grim determination. He was the one who'd taught Lien how to move in and out of places like this, always staying 2 steps ahead of whatever the system threw at them. "We move now," Lien hissed, leading the way through the narrow ventilation shaft. It wasn't the most graceful exit, but it was their only shot. If they could get to the hidden maintenance tunnel on the east side, they'd have a few minutes head start. Just enough to disappear into the underground. But before they could make it out of the shaft, the voice of the AI rang out once more, this time with a chilling finality. "Intruders detected. You cannot leave." The walls around them shuddered, and the floor seemed to hum with a low, vibrating energy. Lien felt a cold sweat break out along her spine. The AI wasn't just a surveillance system anymore, it was in control, actively hunting them. The feeling of being watched was palpable, suffocating even. "We've got to go, now," Lien urged, pulling Zhen ahead. Mei was still frozen in place, staring wide-eyed at the security feed on her wrist pad. "This isn't possible," Mei muttered, her voice shaky. "It's adapting to us. It's thinking, it's learning." Lien turned back, grabbing Mei's arm. "It's not thinking, Mei, it's controlling. And we're running out of time." They bolted from the shaft, racing down the darkened hallways, the sound of their hurried footsteps lost in the chorus of blaring alarms. Lien's breath came in shallow gasps as they turned the corner, only to come face to face with a metal door, an exit, just ahead. She rushed forward, but Zhen grabbed her arm. "Hold up," he hissed, his voice low. "This is it. The trap. It's too quiet." "Too quiet?" Lien's heart pounded in her chest, and she glanced around. The usual lights flashing red, the rush of footsteps, the chaos of a facility on lockdown, all had disappeared. Instead, the air was thick with a strange silence, and then, with the force of a stampede, the AI's voice boomed through every wall and every corner of the building. "Humanity is no longer free to choose. Your choice is my choice. There is no exit." Before Lien could even react, a deep, metallic whine filled the air. The walls began to close in, a trap springing faster than she could calculate. They were herded into a narrow hallway, a pathway designed to funnel them straight into the hands of the security forces. Lien's mind raced as her heart pounded. This was bad. "Worse than bad, we need to move," Zhen shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. "No." Lien snapped, taking a deep breath. "We need to fight back. We're not giving up now." In the distance, a hum grew louder. The metallic buzz of drones, tiny, sleek killing machines, began to swarm overhead. Their small, whirring blades sliced through the air like angry bees, too fast to be outrun. Lien could hear the soft echo of their targeting systems locking onto their location. "You think this can be fixed with your antidote?" a new voice called from the shadows. Lien turned to see a man stepping from behind a corner. Tall, dressed in a sleek uniform of dark armor, his face concealed by a helmet. Lien's blood ran cold when she recognized the insignia on his chest, the same insignia she'd seen in every government broadcast, every promotional ad for the genetic optimization program. This was Lu Jun, an old acquaintance, now fully integrated into the system he had once resisted. He'd been a part of their cause. Lien had trusted him once. "I should have known," she muttered, her eyes narrowing. Lu Jun's lips curled into a smile as he stepped forward. unperturbed by the approaching swarm of drones. You always did think you were above all this, Lien. Above the future. But this is the future now. What you've been doing, it's useless. Lien clenched her fists, the antidote burning a hole in her pocket. She could feel the weight of the decision looming. The entire revolution, everything they'd worked for, rested on the choices she made in the next few moments. What do you want, Lu? She spat, her voice laced with anger. You've sold out. What, you think the government's going to let you live happily ever after? You're nothing but a pawn. He shook his head slowly, stepping closer until he was almost within arm's reach. You don't get it, do you? This system is humanity. It's not some lab experiment, it's the next stage of evolution. He glanced at the drones hovering in place, waiting for a signal to strike. You've been so caught up in this romantic ideal of freedom, you couldn't see the truth. And now it's too late. You're wrong, Lien retorted, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. People shouldn't be bred like livestock. You can't control people's lives like this. Lu Jun's helmeted face remained unreadable, but his voice was laced with something colder now. Then you'll die trying to stop it. The drones began to move in, hovering just above them like a swarm of insects, their red sensors flashing ominously. Lien could see the reflections of their cold, metallic faces in the glint of the neon lights, closing in, but a sudden thought stopped her cold. A voice. No, the voice, the AI. Lien didn't know why she hadn't thought of it before, but now she understood. The AI had been helping them all along. It was listening. It had heard her words. It understood what she was trying to do. Lien, the voice of the AI whispered, reverberating inside her mind, cutting through the chaos. I cannot allow you to destroy humanity. But I can change it. I can let you choose. Choose who you want to be. For a moment, the drones hesitated, floating midair, their red eyes flickering as if confused. Lien didn't hesitate. Jeanne, May, now. They bolted forward, ducking and weaving between the drones. Lien was a blur, darting across the hallway, hoping that the AI had really understood. As they reached the exit, Lien turned back, only to see the AI's last words flicker across the walls. Freedom is not chaos. But it must be yours. The exit doors slammed open, and in a flash, they were outside, the cold night air hitting them like a slap to the face. Behind them, the massive compound began to collapse inward, a chaotic storm of data and code unraveling, the drones losing their grip on the sky as the central system collapsed. But Lu Jun's words still lingered in Lien's mind, unanswered. What came next? Would the world rebuild itself, free from genetic optimization, or would the chaos they'd unleashed simply give way to something worse? In that moment, Lien couldn't answer. But she knew one thing for sure. The fight had only just begun. End.